The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Now aged 91, a woman who spent decades living at Wildwood Ecoforest is sharing her memories. Wildwood is in Yellow Point. In 1945, the late Merv Wilkinson began using the land as an ecoforest. It's a type of forestry that strives to protect and/or restore an ecosystem rather than to maximize the commercial value of a forest over a short time frame. Grace Richard was married to Wilkinson for 30 years and lived on the site. I met up with her at her current home in Parksville, where she shared some of her stories about Wildwood.
Merv's dream always was to eventually leave it to the people of British Columbia. It had never been logged, and we never allowed it to be logged. We were certainly called crazy, stupid a lot in those days, because he wouldn't cut the trees down. And it still looks the way it did when I first saw it.
So a big character in the story of this place that is Wildwood is Merv.
Oh, very much so.
What would you want people to know about him?
How very caring he was about the forest and the land around it, and the lake, because we were careful we didn't contaminate the lake. And he was a fabulous stonemason. There's lots of buildings out in Yellow Point and through Nanaimo. He was very good at stuff like that.
We'll hear more from Grace Richard throughout today's program. I also paid a visit to Wildwood, which today is managed by the nonprofit Ecoforestry Institute Society. I spoke with the Society's chair in the house, designed by Grace Richard.
Hi, I'm Kathy Code. I am the chair of the Ecoforestry Institute Society. I've been on the board for a good many years, since 2014, and I've seen Wildwood go through many adventures during that time, but I am so glad that we were able to save it and keep it in the public domain for generations to come.
And we are having this conversation at Wildwood. We are having it in what was for a long time Grace Richard's house. Can you tell me about what Wildwood is now?
Yes, certainly. Wildwood is a 104-acre ecoforest. An ecoforest is a forest that is kept intact and stewarded according to the principles and practices of ecoforestry. This means selective tree harvesting. This means ensuring that the forest is harvested for the benefit of the forest, not for people. We don't do any clear cutting. We don't plant trees here. We allow Mother Nature to do the natural regeneration in the forest. And Merv began practicing ecoforestry on this property in 1945. Last year we celebrated 80 years of ecoforestry, and although Merv took out hundreds of truckloads, some say as much as 474 truckloads, we still have a functioning ecosystem with all of the water systems and with all of the biodiversity and wildlife habitat that it originally contained.
There are a lot of pieces to this story. A big one is Merv, you talked about there, Merv Wilkinson. What do you think it's important for people to know about him?
Well, originally he bought this property in 1938 with the idea that he would do agriculture on the land. He went to UBC to study agriculture, and when his professor learned of the type of land and forest that he had, he suggested that he do ecoforestry. The professor translated a Swedish course in ecoforestry into English for Merv's benefit, and Merv took this type of ecoforestry to heart, and he was determined to practice it on the land that he had. So he began practicing that in 1945. And over the years, in spite of the loggers who would come along and offer to clear-cut wildwood from time to time, apparently offering as much as $150,000, which was a lot of money in those days, he and Grace always refused. They could see the vision of ecoforestry, and thank goodness they did, because Wildwood is the only working demonstration ecoforest on the west coast of North America.
The house I was speaking with Kathy Code there in was originally designed by Grace Richard. She and Merv Wilkinson had been living in another house on the property that burned down in the 1960s. Richard told me that after the fire, the community came together to help. What was it like trying to come back from a fire burns down where you live in the forest in the mid-1960s?
It was not easy. We had a lot of support from the community. And when we started to build the house, I designed the house. I knew what I would like to have. And the neighbors would come after work, 5 o'clock at night, and they would work for 2 hours on the house, and then they'd go home and the next day go to their jobs again and then come again at night. And that's how we got the house built. Had a very tight community out at Yellow Point.
What do you think that place would be like now today if Merv never bought it and just the Plinko machine of fate took some other machination?
Oh, it would be like all the other places out at Yellow Point. You could see that it had been logged at one point, and somebody would build a nice house on the lake, because it is on the lake, Quesnel Lake, and it would just be a rural place.
What do you think the value is of it not being that, of it still being something, of there's still a Wildwood today? You can go and look at the Wildwood website. You can go pay a visit. You can look up at the old growth trees. What kind of value do you think that brings to us today?
A tremendous amount, especially for the children. The children from the schools like to go, and they do bring classes out from the schools, and the kids are in awe of wandering through the woods, and there's usually a forester with them explaining what they're seeing and why it's the way it is. And there's the potential there to build up more, and I think that the Ecological Society is certainly planning on doing that. And that would be, it should be an ongoing educational place.
When I was at Wildwood Ecoforestry Institute Society Chair Kathy Code gave me a tour of the site. We came across some of the old growth trees on the property.
There's some really huge trees here, like this one, probably 500 or 600 years old. So you can imagine something that's been around since, the 1500s, 1600s. What a history that is for these trees to have thrived for so long.
So how does a tree like this in a place that is an ecoforest, it's still a forest that's being harvested occasionally, how does a tree like this make it to today?
Well, we recognize these as mother trees, and so we don't cut them. The forest is we're losing our mother trees, and we really need to keep the ones that we have. And they usually have really good seed, so it's really good and important that they have a chance to disperse their seed around. So, and you can see there's a lot of growth that has come up since these old trees first started. So,
Wildwood is also home to many nurse stumps, where new life is emerging from the remains of trees that have been harvested or come down naturally.
This is a log that has been left here to decompose into the forest floor and add its nutrients to the life cycle. But you can see all the life that's grown on top of it, from the moss on up to huckleberries, to cedars, to Douglas firs. So we just let them do what they will. It really is a lovely setting.
We also came across a freshly fallen tree, now ready to contribute to the ecosystem in a different way.
Oh, this tree fell down. Oh my goodness. It was intact last time I came through, just a few days ago. Wow! Holy crow! Wow, that must have been a thunderous roar. What happens with some of these big old trees is that they have root rot in the center. The center just turns to powder, and after a while the tree just gives way and comes crashing down. Oh my goodness.
So what happens to this now?
Well, we will just leave it here. We will just let it add its nutrients, decompose and add its nutrients to the forest floor. Obviously it's not millable. You can see it's in shreds. Merv used to tidy his forest floor until somebody came along and suggested that he not do that. And so he learned that when you leave structures like this on the forest floor, it attracts insects, it attracts small mammals like voles, and that attracts other forest life as well. So it really adds to the forest life.
Coming up, we'll hear more from Grace Richard and Kathy Code about Wildwood.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
We're focusing on Grace Richard and Wildwood Ecoforest on today's program. Richard lived at the site in Yellow Point for more than 30 years. Now, aged 91, she lives in Parksville. That's where I met up with her to hear some memories of Wildwood. Richard spoke about witnessing clear-cut logging in other areas on Vancouver Island.
All of us, well, most of the people in the rural area, are shocked at what they've done to the mountains on the island and how they've just cut most of the timber, and I don't know if it'll ever grow up as well. It won't be ever as thick as it was.
What has it been like witnessing that change over the course of your lifetime?
Well, I always wished we owned more property so we could protect more property. It was a fabulous place to raise a family. There was lots of wildlife, the deer. Only saw a bear on that property once, but certainly lots of deer and lots of beaver. And the beaver, believe it or not, when I was living there, we had quite a deck off the house, and the beaver would come morning and night. They would be swimming out in the lake, and if I wasn't on the deck and didn't talk to them, they would come right up close to the house and bang their tails because they were trying to get my attention. If I went out and said, yes, I'm home, then they would mind their own business. But otherwise, they were either scared to come in too close or really wanted to know what was going on. So we had a lot of wildlife interaction that was very valuable to us and certainly to the children that were with us.
I also paid a visit to Grace Richard's old home at Wildwood, where I spoke with Kathy Code. A reminder, she's chair of the nonprofit Ecoforestry Institute Society, who now look after the land. When trees are cut down in an ecoforest, what are they cut down for? Where do they go? What happens to them?
Yeah, so far the trees that we've harvested have gone into the rebuilding of the homestead. When we acquired Wildwood, the homestead was not in very good shape, and it meant that we had to gut it and completely rebuild it. So we used a lot of that wood then in the rebuilding and restoration of the homestead. And so that's where most of the milled lumber has gone so far.
You talked about this as being a demonstration ecoforest. What are you demonstrating to people?
We are demonstrating that you can still harvest a forest, but you can do it with respect with the trees, for the trees, and for the nature that inhabits the ecosystem, the biodiversity that exists, all the way from the tiny flowers in the forest, the calypso orchids and the fawn lilies, all the way up to the massive maples and the huge Douglas firs and cedars. That there is an intact and interconnected life force that inhabits these types of systems, and when you break that type of cycle, then you lose so much. And I think that we have no idea of how much we've lost so far. So I think that's why Wildwood is so important, because of the research that we can do here to learn more about the cycle of a forest, an intact forest.
So what happens day to day then here at Wildwood?
Oh, yeah. There's lots of activity on the land. Every year, our naturalists design educational programming. Hundreds of children, school children, are bussed in, and they have a wonderful time running and playing in the forest and learning about the forest. So that's a wonderful program to have. We also have public tours every third Sunday of the month. We can organize private tours. We have workshops such as mushroom identification, bird watching, bat nights, where people can witness the bats as they come out of their bat condos. They'd had a party in the homestead for about 20 years before we came along to restore the property. So we had to evict them in a gentle manner. And so while they were away hibernating one year, we shut off all of the access points to the homestead and built them some bat condos, which they took to when they returned. So we were very grateful for that.
What kind of protections are there around the land? What kind of guarantee is there to kind of try and ensure that if we're having this conversation 100 years from now, there's still a Wildwood?
Oh, that's such a great question, because that's one of the great assets that we had when we were in court, that we were able to present to the justice in terms of determining who would be the best steward of Wildwood. Canada's foremost trust lawyer, Dr. Donovan Waters, wrote us up a trust deed that defines ecoforestry, defines how Wildwood can be managed and stewarded. And that document now has been placed on the title of the property. It is irrevocable. What it means is that Wildwood can never be sold to a private individual. It must always be stewarded by a like-minded charitable society. And so it will always be stewarded according to ecoforestry principles and practices. There is no way for any of the parties to ever change that. And so we will be here in some form in the public domain forever.
You alluded to a court case there about, well, not about, 10 years ago, Wildwood, the Supreme Court of Canada was deciding who was going to get Wildwood. Is there anything you'd want people to know about the process of transferring ownership and just how much was involved in getting the place to where it is today?
Well, as Merv and Grace aged, they realized that they needed a way to steward Wildwood for the rest of eternity. And so they entrusted the care of Wildwood to the Land Conservancy. And the community was solidly behind them, raising over $1 million then to that effort. Unfortunately, TLC fell into debt, and their response was to sell the properties that they had to repay the debt. When it came to Wildwood, they decided, though, to sell it to a private individual. And we, as the Ecoforestry Institute Society, who were the official managers of Wildwood, we objected to that. We were determined to keep it in the public domain. People had donated specifically for that purpose, and we felt responsible for holding that promise. And so we hired a lawyer. We went to court. And when the justice announced that she would decide who would gain stewardship of Wildwood through a sealed bid process, we had one night then to get all our ducks in order and make sure that we had enough money to present to the court. So we managed to get a $450,000 mortgage through Van City. We were very grateful for their sponsorship of us. And the rest of it we gathered from community support and creditors of TLC who were willing to forgive their debts, provided it went to Wildwood. So it was kind of an innovative way to fund our purchase. So we came in at $800,000 plus the trust deed, plus a detailed ecoforestry management plan, plus the promise that we would put a covenant on the property. And so when the justice opened the bids the next morning, she pronounced us as the stewards of Wildwood. Thank goodness. But it came within a hair's breadth. We won only by $30,000.
So, Ecoforestry Institute, you have folks who run demonstrations here with, say, school groups. The homestead that Grace Richard used to live in is now a bit of a sort of an Airbnb that people can rent out and come here and be amidst nature. You mentioned that you don't get government funding. What is kind of the model or the plan, or are you operating in a way that you foresee this being kind of sustainable for the next few decades?
Oh, absolutely. The secret is to develop a number of different revenue streams so that you're not ever reliant on any one of them. And the thing is not to look at the forest as a potential moneymaker. It's not like, we have a mortgage, we still owe $350,000, and it's our dream to get that paid off now. That's probably going to be one of our next projects. But we're not going to go into the forest and say we need to cut $350,000 worth of trees to make up this debt. We will pay the debt down as we can according to the revenue that comes in from our numerous revenue streams. But yeah, it would never be in our nature then to cut down the forest to pay our debts.
To the extent that there's even a legal trust that would prevent you from doing that, if I understand it correctly?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. We still have to operate within within ecological parameters. We still believe in the social and the economic approaches that we have to take when stewarding this property, but it's all bounded by the ecological parameters. So they're not equal. Many approaches, describe the three legged stool. Economic, social, and environmental. In our case, the economic and the social are within the ecological parameter, which is quite different.
Merv Wilkinson passed on around 15 years ago. I was talking to Grace Richard, who was his wife for a long time, who's now 91. As we move decades into the future, what part of their legacy do you think you want to keep alive and keep going?
Oh, I think their dedication to this forest, to Wildwood, is just outstanding. The number of times that they could have just had Wildwood just clear cut and gone off and enjoyed the money. To me, their vision of Wildwood is an ecoforest when a time when ecoforestry wasn't even a thing. It's just phenomenal. Grace stayed here for 30 years. And she loved Wildwood. I think it was very difficult for her to leave, but she decided after that time that she needed to see the world outside of Wildwood. And from what she told me, she invited Merv to come with her, but he couldn't leave Wildwood. He was bound to Wildwood. So she went off on her own, eventually remarried, and was a successful businesswoman in her own right. And so it was a few years before we were able to connect with her again. I thought we had lost her forever, so I was quite relieved to hear from her again, right? So, and I know she's so emotionally attached to this property and to this house, and I think she had a great many apprehensions before she wanted to come and see what we had done and how we were running Wildwood. And so when we brought her here to see what we have done with the homestead and how we have refurbished it and restored it, she was just so overwhelmed. She loved what we had done, and she loves the fact that we are continuing, the ecoforestry legacy, in following in Merv's footsteps, but also honoring her too for the role that she's played in Wildwood. I think it's unfortunate that the women of Wildwood often get lost in this whole thing. So I'm only too pleased to tell people the role that Grace has had in Wildwood.
What was it like reconnecting with her?
Oh, it was just so amazing to hear firsthand stories of her memories of this place. You know, she worked so hard over the years, you know, to keep the family going.
And like you say, there may be illustrative of so much of history and what goes into keeping a place alive, and the contributions of other people, particularly the contributions of women, often kind of don't get the same time in the spotlight.
That's right, and Grace worked very hard over those years. She raised foster children. She raised veggies. They had animals as well. So she told me that, you know, if they didn't grow it, they didn't eat it. So, you know, what she produced here on the land was really important to the family's well-being. And so she designed this homestead with children in mind. She said that she built the basement extra high because that was the playroom for the children. So that's really pretty cool. All those little stories, those little details of how she designed this place and how she lived here. It's a story that I would like told sometime. So at some point I'd like to do a documentary with her so that she can tell her story.
Is there anything else you think it's important to share today about either Wildwood or about reconnecting with Grace? Or
Yeah, well, certainly we want to make sure that Grace remains an important part of Wildwood and part of the Wildwood story. I think that's really critical that we keep that going. But other things that we'd like to incorporate here in upcoming programs include things like art shows and camps, art and film and music and photography. Those are things that we have this wonderful forest, and we can use the forest environment then to do these wonderful human things.
Kathy Code is chair of the Ecoforestry Institute Society. We were speaking in the home designed by Grace Richard at Wildwood Ecoforest in Yellow Point. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Fruit is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, you can email us at news@chly.ca. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. That's all for now. We'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.